X-Men 97 isn't the terrible show that people thought it was going to be. It's pretty solid, but it's also far from a masterpiece. Hey, what's up, Nerd fam? It's your boy Gashawn. I want to welcome you to Enter the Nerd. Today, we are talking about X-Men 97. It finally ended. I wanted to give it some time. I was going to start actually reviewing it almost like episode by episode or every 2 episodes, but I was like, you know what? Let me give it a fair shake and really get this entire narrative out the way, right? Okay, so initial thoughts. Like when I first heard about the show, I'll be honest with you, I was scared, like a lot of other people, because to be honest, there hasn't, in my opinion, been a largely entertaining on both levels, meaning like entertaining for like general and entertaining for somebody like me who loves the source material, right? When it comes to a lot of the Marvel stuff, hasn't been good, especially with a lot of like the beating over the head of the socio-political commentary, even in the comics themselves, like recently. I was scared. I didn't know what to expect, but I am happy to say that this show is definitely not terrible. It's pretty solid. It is entertaining. And at the very least, you can say that the people who made this show did give a shit. They really did try to make this show as good as they knew how to. I'll say that, and I'll get to that in a second when I mean knew how. Obviously the representation of certain powers, I mean, everybody liked what they did with Cyclops. A lot of comic book readers like myself did like the allusion that it did to a lot of different comic book storylines. But therein lies its biggest flaw, in my estimation, because here's what a lot of people are saying. Obviously, everybody thought, like I said in the beginning, that this was going to be kind of a weird show. But then now people think that it's just a perfect show. And obviously, that's subjective. Some people could say that. But if you are down to be objective, if you're watching this video, the source material does matter here. And the reason why I say that is because they skirt past a lot of different stories here. Now, initially, I thought that was because maybe this season, which was only 10 episodes, was so much shorter than the original. So while this show was going on, I was rewatching the original series, X-Men the Animated Series, and that was only 13 episodes. I thought it was like 20 initially. Maybe it just felt like that when I was a kid, but it was only 13, so only 3 more episodes. So what storylines did they kind of skirt past? You know, like E for Extinction, Operation Zero Tolerance, Inferno, Life, Death, Fatal Attraction, a whole bunch of different stuff that they just kind of do brief glimpses of and then speed past. And some of these storylines aren't even within the same decade. I think some of them are in the 80s, some of them in the 90s, and they kind of run them concurrently. Now, here's the thing. Inherently, blending storylines is not a bad thing. However, I think they could have chosen 1 or 2, blended those, and expanded it so we can get deeper characterization. And we still could have gotten an immensely entertaining show while pleasing both comic book alike and people who are general. I'm not saying that people who read comics weren't entertained, because I was, but because I knew what a lot of these storylines could go to and how expansive they could be, I was like, I get what they were trying to do here, but it could have actually been better for both audiences had they just maybe went to 1 or 2 storylines and just went there, right? One of the things that was like my biggest complaint is that, because characters like Magneto goes through a lot of growth that they kind of just speed past, you know what I mean? Which obviously is a shame, because we know what Magneto, well, if you read the comics, you know he's pretty much in the beginning just a villain. He's a villain, and then he makes subtle growth later. No, it's not a Magneto Malcolm X thing. I mean, Magneto, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King, Professor Xavier. That's already been debunked. So let's stop that. Let's stop that already. Especially if you don't know what Malcolm X really was. Let's just put that to bed. But when I really look at some of the things that made me shake my head story, and then even the weird things they were doing with Morph, right? Now, Morph is not really a comic book character. He's based off of a comic book character, but he was kind of made specifically for the animated series, and whatever the hell this isn't what he was originally. And he's actually a little bit too powerful because he just has shape-shifting powers normally, but in this, he kind of like inherited the powers of some of the mutants that he was shape-shifting into. Like he was like, or just sorry, people, because he was like the Hulk at one point. And it was almost like, if you've got that, how are you losing? Right? It was one of those weird situations. That's just for me. That's me being, I guess, nitpicky from like, you know, reading comics and stuff like that. I can admit that. At the same time, when you got somebody like that on a team that can emulate all that, like emulating Psylocke's powers and stuff like that, it's like, you know, how are you losing? I mean, why couldn't they have used that with Magneto's powers if he could do that? Like, what's the limitations of his powers? Whatever. That's me. Then that weird thing they did when he was like saying "I love you" to Wolverine, and then like the actual guy that got fired, that was, I think it was the director or something like that, did say like he was like confessing his love for him, and I'm like, okay, right? It was just one of them things that you knew had to get inserted at some point. But luckily, this does not ruin the show. It's just like an eye-rolling moment for me at least, because it's just one of those like self-insert kind of things. But like I said, they skirt past a lot of things. Now, the ending of this show, what does it tell us? There's a couple storylines I can already see that they're about to go into. They're gonna go into Blood of Apocalypse, which is when he turns Gambit into the Horseman Death, and they kind of allude to that when he holds up the card and stuff like that. Rise of Apocalypse, where he looks exactly like how he does when you see him when he's young, and they talk about how he goes from that to being the Apocalypse we know. The adventures of, I think, like Cyclops and Jean Grey, where they're actually in, like, they're in somebody else, like two other people's bodies, and they're mentoring Nathan Dayspring or a young Cable. They're obviously, I think they're going a different route, and they have them in their actual bodies meeting him, which is different. There's also a run right after Wolverine gets the adamantium ripped out of his body, and he's like, I think his healing factor is all burnt out from keeping him alive, or trying to, and then he's like bleeding every single time he takes his claws out, and he's like more feral, I think. And then he gets his adamantium back eventually by, I believe, becoming War himself for Apocalypse. So I think that's most likely coming. That's how he's gonna get the stuff back. And Forge and Bishop, they showed them at the end as well. I believe that's like there's an X Factor run with like Forge in it, and I think that's also, they're gonna talk about that, which should be interesting. But I think those, if it's still 10 episodes and they're dealing with all of those storylines, we're gonna run into that same thing where it's all of those stories were actually really dope in themselves, but we're gonna get sped up versions of it just to get a little bit of bang here, bang here, bang here, to get people like, oh my god, it's amazing, it's amazing, amazing. But the true characterization might be lost. It could be lost, and you never know. It's different directors. Now the guy got fired, is not there anymore, so it could either be better, worse, or more of the same. So we don't know. But either way, this show is solid. It's not bad. Anyone who's still saying it's bad or whatever, I think they're just holding on to the original ideas. But I think the whole masterpiece thing is a bit hyperbole at best, unless like you just really love it. But I think it happens. People might say that because it's one of the better things they've seen from Marvel, and sometimes that can make people go like, oh my god, it's the best thing I've ever seen. Somebody said it was better than like Invincible Season 2. Now, I prefer Invincible Season 2 only because it's still going with a lot of the themes that we see in the book, and we know that Invincible, that show, is most likely going to end up exactly where the books are. And that's good, because you want it to end up with the entire plate of story that it has. When you start skipping and cherry picking, like what happens in this show, you're gonna end up having to create a whole bunch of new stuff that may or may not land because of the parts that you decided to choose. Now, this is not a direct, obviously, adaptation. It's just kind of based on the comics when it comes to this, which isn't bad inherently, but sometimes the execution can leave a person like me wanting for more. Let me know, did you love X-Men 97? I enjoyed it, but I told you what my pet peeves were. If you had any pet peeves, let me know. What did you love about it? Let's talk about it in the comics. In the comments, not comics. If we can do that too, that'd be dope. Either way, let's talk about it. Enter the nerd.